Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. It's really great to be participating and hosting this wonderful event today. Thank you all for joining. This event, as you know, is in the month of March because of the women's holiday, 8th of March, month dedicated to women and particularly women in leadership and women in tech for our event today. Um, I'm really happy to be hosting and moderating this discussion today with two wonderful and inspiring women in tech. And I would like to introduce them to you today. We'll start alphabetically. So the first speaker today is Ana Milicevic. Her current role is principal and co-founder at Sparrow Digital Holdings, and she's based in New York. She's an entrepreneur, media executive, and digital technology innovator. Anna's current venture is the first one launched under the Sparrow Digital Holdings portfolio, Sparrow Advisors, a strategic consultancy helping marketers and C-suite executives navigate digital transformation, strategy, marketing, customer insights, and the data-driven ad tech and martech waters. By the way, we advise all of you to mute your microphones during the first part of the discussion. And afterwards, we'll have a Q&A session where you could take part. Being an AUBG event, we really very much encourage this type of discussion during the Q&A. To continue on the bio on Anna, she's a pioneer of digital data management. Anna was responsible for the development of the industry-leading Demdex platform, now Adobe Audience Manager, from its early days through its successful acquisition and integration into the Adobe Digital Marketing Suite. Prior to starting Sparrow, Anna established Signal's Global Strategic Consulting Group and helped Fortune 500 customers adopt advanced and predictive analytics across their marketing, ad ops, and digital content business units. Earlier in her career, she held key leadership roles in media and entertainment, startups and scale-ups in Europe and the US. Her consulting portfolio includes executing digital initiatives in more than 50 countries and advising companies on go-to-market strategies. She's also a mentor at New York's Entrepreneurs Roundtable Accelerator, ERA. And of course, few words about her AUBG experience. She graduated computer science cum laude. About our second speaker today, Denitza Krasteva. Her current role is Senior Director Product Development at Oracle, also based in New York. Her expertise includes financial consolidation and reporting software domain, commercial software release cycle management and operations, leading global teams, customer escalation resolution handling, talent management and growth, and project management. Prior to her current role, Denitza held different positions in Oracle for the past 13 years, from Director of Product Development to Senior Manager of Software Engineering, where she led global teams of software engineers and was responsible for delivering commercial releases of best-of-breed financial software. Previously, Denitza was Manager of Software Development at Hyperion Solutions, leading several teams of software engineers working on multiple projects across 3 geographic locations. She was responsible for delivering commercial releases of the financial management and BPM architect products. Products consist of over 1 million lines of code with a total of more than 20 developers. Her major at AUBG was computer science as well. She also holds a Master of Science in Computer Science from Virginia Polytechnic Institute and State University. And a few words about myself. Thanks again for the invitation to moderate today. My current role is an executive director at the Bulgarian Private Equity and Venture Capital Association, BVCA, where we represent Bulgaria-based fund managers investing in international portfolio companies. Previously, I was part of the European Private Equity and Venture Capital Association with 600 member firms and as many affiliated members from seed and venture capital to mid-market and large buyouts. I'm also a mentor at the Female Factor, global mentorship program with more than 150 business leaders, and a co-founder of the Return Project, bridging entrepreneurs and investors from Eastern Europe to the ones in the US. About AUBG, I graduated double major, business administration, and journalism and mass communications. Hello to the speakers today. Hello, Ana. Hello, Denitza.
Hi. Hi, hi.
I'd like to kick off with the first question to both of you. Thanks again for participating. You now both work at high-level positions in the tech industry, but let's go back in time a little bit. Where were you after graduation and what was your first job like? Ana, let's start with you.
Ooh, quick to the time machine. I kind of lucked my way into entrepreneurship while I was at AUBG. And so I started a software outsourcing company. And just to tell you how long ago this was, one of the main things that we built were like intranet solutions. And this was before you could get like an actual CMS off the shelf. Open source was, practically non-existent. I'm really dating myself now. But it was like a lot of these things that we take for granted today and that make me super excited about the space today, and especially about AUBG in Bulgaria, were actually not really in existence back then. So it was funny because I didn't think of myself as an entrepreneur. That wasn't really a legitimate career in Eastern Europe at the time. Like in Serbia, we didn't really have a word for it that wasn't in kind of a slightly negative connotation. So I think my family for the first few years just kept telling everybody that I'm a student or that I'm unemployed and not the founder of a company. So yeah, it got a lot better after that. But I started my career as an entrepreneur, and I've kind of continued on that path with some stops at larger companies and places like the United Nations along the way.
Great. Indeed, in what we see also in the venture capital industry here in Bulgaria and in the entrepreneurial ecosystem, your words are still somewhat relevant today. Yeah. but we see that there is more and more understanding of the entrepreneurial job, and so much that is behind it, obviously. Denitza, what about you? How did you start after graduation? What was your first steps into your successful career?
So I guess I would also be dating myself, and this is even more long ago than Ana. But I actually, there were friends from the computer science program while I was still studying there. I started doing internships and working during breaks for a small company that was essentially doing outsourcing of software development. And so I did that, I think, through my junior and senior year. And then I was lucky that when I graduated, I had pretty much a job waiting for me. And I did that for a year. And it was great fun because it was people that I went to school with. And I mean, it was almost like a continuation of the computer science lab. Sometimes like people would do their quirky habits and we would all laugh. And so that was great. And then after a year of that, I basically went for my master's degree. So I came to the US and studied at Virginia Tech.
Great. So Denitza, is it true that you're from the first class of AUBG?
That is true. Yes.
Great. Absolutely great. Amazing. So what was your first job? Like, was it in Bulgaria, you say, or you started abroad?
It was in Sofia. So first I was doing it during breaks, and then when I graduated, the offices were in Sofia. So I spent a year working for that company before I left.
Yeah. Okay, so both of you are now in the US. You started in Bulgaria at AUBG, where you had your education. How has your career progressed since AUBG? So you had your first job. What happened afterwards? Ana, perhaps we can go back with you.
Yeah.
How did you end up in New York City, this great position?
Well, I'm originally Serbian, so for me, Bulgaria was the kind of the study abroad experience, and you know the 90s, especially the late 90s in Serbia, were not a very fun time. So you kind of had to have a plan B in general, and my plan B was always to come to the U.S. So not a lot of thought went into this process. It was always very clear that I was gonna come this way. And then, you know, as with my first business, I was developing clients that were based here. So I kind of had a soft landing once I got here. And then I think partly because no one really understood what entrepreneurship was back then, I kind of got pulled into joining the UN as a consultant for UNICEF. And that's a role. I think that's the role that my family still thinks is like the perfect role for me, because it, you know, and it encompassed working for an international organization like the UN. It's also something that you could tell people, you know, you're like, oh, she works for the UN, it's great. As opposed to like, she works at a company she started, like that doesn't sound that great, right? And so I worked on applications of technology, and mainly digital technologies, to furthering health messages across the world. And that was by far I've mostly been in global roles in my career, but that was by far the most far-reaching one, because it covered some countries where you know you would not have electricity all the time. So when you don't have electricity all the time, you have to think about software and programs that are serving that audience very differently. And then I escaped the big company, big organization space after about 3 years in, and I dove very deep into the New York startup ecosystem. I joined a video entertainment startup, followed by an audio entertainment startup. And I was really digging deep onto media and entertainment, because I realized that for me, the allure of technology wasn't really just the technology side, but the intersection of technology and business. So I gravitated towards product and strategy and product management leadership roles, which were fairly new back then. It's not, certainly not something that I would have been aware of when I was at uni. And just built from there with a progression of you know, different companies. The company I joined after the audio startup was in digital data advertising. That was then acquired by Adobe. So I did a tour in larger company land. I was then recruited into SaaS, again, larger company land, and then some kind of mid-size, high growth companies, until finally being back to starting my next new company, which is Sparrow, and working with more or less the same customers that I've worked at the larger companies before that.
Sounds quite inspiring.
It's very hard to congest that into like a
Yeah.
quick hit narrative. So
Yeah, absolutely. But you know, it got me thinking, and I remind our audience today in preparation of their questions afterwards for the Q&A part. It's really great to have, you know, both an entrepreneur and someone from the corporate world, and see your experiences and to learn from them. So Denitza, what about you? Tell us more about your how your career progressed since your graduation at AUBG.
Yeah, so after I graduated from Virginia Tech, I went back to I started out as a software developer for a company that produces essentially like what we refer to now as fintech, and so I basically honed into what I really love about, one of the things that I love many things about technology and jobs in technology, but the one thing that maybe was my first love of technology was the problem solving aspect and the ability to like dig very deep and solve problems. So I did that as an individual contributor. So I was like a developer, and then I kind of rose through the individual contributor track. And I really loved it. I enjoyed doing that. And then like 10 years within doing heavy duty individual contributor stuff, I decided that I wanted to maybe try my hand at leadership. And lead teams and get involved more on the product strategy and the product development. And I realized that's another thing that I really love about technology. To some degree, I kind of see it as, because I also love literature and performance. I have very broad interests. And I realized, creating a product felt to me like putting on a big performance, which I've always loved theatrical productions. And I just loved being in charge of that. Like I felt like, oh, I'm, the director who gets to see how all has the artistic vision and the creative vision. And I see it as a deeply creative process that I just get a lot of reward out of it. So I've been kind of like doing more team leadership and more kind of product strategy and development, and that's been like what I've been doing in the most recently and what I currently do. So there's a lot of elements which I love, which is how to motivate teams, how to maintain operational efficiency, and then the actual process of designing and figuring out product strategy.
Speaking of the broader interest that you mentioned before, reminds me of the liberal arts education at the AUBG. So perhaps that was something like a bonus that we had there.
Actually, I was going to mention that, and that is actually a very important point, and I'm happy to say more about it. So or maybe I can refer to it in the next questions, but I'm a huge fan of the liberal arts style of education, and I personally think I got a lot out of it, and I use some of those skills to this day.
Wonderful. Anna, what about yourself? Do you feel like AUBG and particularly the liberal arts educational system prepared you for your career today, and how?
Yeah, for me, it was interesting because I finished high school in Serbia, and Eastern European, Central European education is very structured. So we actually went very deep on a lot of topics and subjects that I really didn't care about, and then very shallow on the few that we did. So for example, we had, I think, chemistry for like 6 years, and I couldn't care less about chemistry, but we only had like computer science for like a year in high school. And I was in a math and sciences high school. So it was, so I liked the fact that you can kind of combine your own version of what you're interested in and what you want to study, and that was a really, really very impactful for me. So bizarrely, some of the lessons, some of the subjects that I enjoyed digging into at AUBG were not related to technology at all. Like, I know I like tech, this is my home, but one of my favorite classes was about Ottoman history, and it was the first chance to look at the Ottoman period in the Balkans that I had in a different light and really explore it from different perspectives. So I loved branching out into those kinds of adjacent areas. And Denitza, you mentioned like theater and productions and stuff like that. I took a couple of theater classes at AUBG as well, and I think that's probably been the most impactful for my day-to-day, because I speak a lot, whether at conferences or in front of clients or in board meetings or similar, and that performance aspect that we learned in theater class is really coming in handy every day.
That's actually, speaking of favorite classes, and just to say a little bit more about the liberal arts, if I may, is that okay, Maria?
Absolutely, please.
So yeah, I actually took a class in Arthurian literature with Dr. Sandy Feinstein, and I didn't know what to expect, and I was just like so blown away by the perspective, and I had so much fun just doing the assignments and working on it, and I never would have, I guess, expected that I would love it so much, and it just sounds like such an obscure topic, but then I realized, it's Arthurian literature, but it actually, what I got out of it is that, a simple myth like Arthur's, the legend of King Arthur, really actually could be a study of societal norms and mores throughout the ages and how those changed. And yeah, and I took another class in philosophy, and I remember I wrote a paper, is reality real or not, or something like that. And then I keep thinking to this day back to my paper, so just like the critical way of thinking and the different perspective, in addition to the problem solving and the computer science classes, is just, I love that.
It's really great and inspiring to understand that this type of education and the general and other subjects really help your other work. So you need to combine abstract and logic in order to be successful and fulfilled life in your career. And thanks for sharing. But going back to your current job, I think it's important to kind of understand better what is your day like, what is your current work, what is your routine, what are some of your challenges, as well as things that inspire you at your current job.
Ooh, how much time do you have? So for me, there's no such thing as a typical day, and that's one of the really cool things about this. So we're in the expanding rapidly growth phase, and that's always been the most exciting phase for me. But we're also a management consultancy, so there's an actual limitation on the amount of time you can spend with a client. So I work across multiple time zones. We have clients on 6 continents now, which basically means that I don't really sleep, but I partition my day. Yeah, I partition my week so that on some days I'll be more available for like Asia Pacific time zones, and then on others in Europe and similar. And that somehow tends to work out. So it's mostly client calls, understanding and problem solving, and kind of triaging what they're struggling with. It's a lot of understanding of where the ad tech, advertising, marketing, technology, commerce industries are going. A lot of just getting the pulse of what everybody else is working on in the industry, so that we can distill that then to actionable items to our clients. A lot of reviews of decks and like PowerPoint, Excel spreadsheet and stuff that we pull together as deliverables. And then the last year has been quite unusual for me because I have not been on an airplane in more than a year. Which is not something that happens. Normally, I travel probably about 2 weeks out of every month, sometimes even more frequently than that, at different client engagements, or just kind of covering doing business development in different regions as well, and being on the conference circuit. So the last year has been very strange. And I don't think I necessarily like to be in one place this long. So I am looking forward to the times when we get to move around a little bit more, hopefully sometime soon in like the next couple of months. And yeah, it's really a mix of every given day. But most of my work is client facing. I'd say probably about 80%, and then 20% is just coordinating with my team and my lieutenants on what needs to be done.
Yeah, it's definitely different for all of us during COVID times. Less traveling, more Zoom meetings, very different times. How do you feel in these times, Denitza, and how do you deal with your current job? What does it entail? How's your day looking like?
Yeah, so I guess I was spending, so for me, it's different in the sense that I was already spending more than half of my day on Zoom calls anyway. And it's partially because we have a very distributed team. So we have people in India, people in Europe, and then people in different time zones in the US. So mornings are usually reserved for phone calls with people east of us, so like India and Europe, and sometimes APAC. And then so after lunch, usually there's I try to save, there's meetings more with US people and Pacific Coast, and then the late afternoon is where I try to actually have some downtime where I could just do my own work. So and then in terms of what we do during those meetings, I like to read a lot of kind of like books around you know, teams and efficiency. And so one of my current challenges for this year is I'm trying to implement certain things for the team. And one of them is I read Kim Scott's Radical Candor. And I'm also in the process of reading Extreme Ownership, which I know a lot of like software teams are also embracing. And I apologize, I can't quote the authors' names. I should have written those down. But basically, I'm trying to. So that's me and the managers. We're trying to build a culture where every individual feels motivated and kind of has that sense of extreme ownership. And I always tell like the same. I say this to my lieutenants and to myself. What if I get hit by a bus? I want like you guys to be able to function really well without me for a long time. And same to my lieutenants, if you get hit by a bus, I want your team to be able to kind of not miss a stride. So that's like one of the things that I'm challenging my team for us to build that sort of culture, and also get the best out of developers, provide them with the candid guidance so that they can be the best performers, and it's also the best individuals that they can be.
Sounds like very creative environment, actually. So it sounds really great. Okay, now a bit more challenging question. Well, the area you work is perceived as more male dominated. Do you think that's the case? And what is your experience with having any bias, gender bias on the workplace?
Ooh, talk about a loaded question, right?
Yeah.
You know, I when you pick a technical field like CS or really anything related to technology, I think you kind of have to be ready to very frequently be the only woman in the room. I mean, if I kind of counted all the different meetings and interactions that I've had, from like, you know, hey, can you help us implement this project, to like board level interactions at large companies, I was more often than not the only woman there. And when you're the only of anything, you're, you know, you're playing defense from the get-go, right? And you're definitely dealing with assumptions that people have made about you before you even walked into the room. So I think one thing that growing up in Eastern Europe doesn't prepare you for is how unequal life in the West is for women, especially in the US. And that was something that was very difficult for me personally to reconcile, because I expected to be, you know, treated as a peer. And for certainly when I was, you know, earlier on in my career, that really wasn't the case in a lot of places. And so, you know, there's a lot of work to be done to just get to parity and equality. But I've also noticed something really interesting in my own hiring preferences, is that I tend to hire other people who have been that one person, the only different person in the room. And I think that gives a lot of perspective and very different approaches, and that just tends to be kind of who I prefer working with. It's very different when you have your first experience in a truly balanced and equal team. It's a palpable difference in how you can work, and you know, that just like you don't have to be on guard all the time. You can relax and focus on your work. I think it's probably more pronounced in corporate life. I have a long litany of you know, challenges from friends and peers who have been passed over for promotions, or, you know, generally kind of not given the same platform for advancement as their male peers. And I think part of the reason that I've embraced the entrepreneur path is that I don't want to be dealing with that. I think I can create a better environment without having to deal with the frameworks that I'd be running into head first, or glass ceiling first, I guess, if I were in different environments.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. It's really great what you're doing, diversifying the teams. As we learn more and more that diversity is a strength, I think we're more and more convinced on that. And what you shared about your experience coming from Serbia and here in the Eastern Bloc, it's a bit different for us. We're used to, perhaps historically, not to have that bias, especially for women in leadership positions.
Yeah.
I mean,
we've been exposed to women in leadership. At least I was, like, growing up, all of my friends' moms not only worked, but they had, they were in leadership positions. Like, they were, one ran a hospital, another was like a head researcher and things like that. And then when I moved to the US, my peer set didn't have that same experience. So a lot of my friends, like, their mothers were not part of the workforce. They were not expected to be part of the workforce. And so there are, like, generations of women that did not participate in leadership roles here. And I wasn't ready for that. I didn't see it coming. It was quite a blindside when I landed here. And, I had big ambitions and aspirations, and the organizations over here kind of expected me not to. So that's changing, but it's nowhere near equity.
Yeah, absolutely. Denitza, what about you? Like, what do you see bias in the workplace as well, and how do you deal with that? You're in the corporate side, so perhaps you'd like to share your experience with us.
Yeah. Well, okay. So as Anna was speaking, she made some really interesting points, and I actually I'm probably going to forget my train of thought here, but I'd like to kind of maybe speak to some of the things that she said. So I really liked what you said, where if you're the only one of your kind at any type of gathering or professional setting, you're immediately playing defense. And I think that's absolutely true. And I've experienced that myself. And it just reminded me of something that I heard recently. So there's a conference called Grace Hopper, and I'm sure you're familiar with it. And it's the largest, I think they said, I heard it's the largest international conference for women in technology. So it's absolutely awesome, and it draws internationally. I actually highly recommend it to any women, and it's actually not just for women, anyone is welcome to it. I was listening to, someone was advising on how to, advising us on if you wanted to submit to as a presenter, giving you tips and tricks. And the woman mentioned, kind of offhandedly, but it really kind of, I think it demonstrates what Anna said. She said, one of the most common submissions, it just comes up every year, and there's like tens, or I don't know, she said hundreds of it, is about the imposter complex, that women suffer from the imposter complex. And then she went on to explain how if you wanted to stand out with that type of submission, what you have to do. But I think that stuck with me. Why are there so many submissions of women talking about feeling suffering or whatever from the imposter complex? And I think it's because when you're the only one who's of your kind, like the only woman in this case, you start thinking, maybe I don't belong. Maybe something is, I shouldn't be here. And you start immediately like double guessing yourself, your opinions and everything. And I think that is one of the key things that maybe if you haven't had that experience, it's hard to realize. And so so that's one of the things. And then I think in terms of bias in the workplace, there's probably two things. One is maybe there's blind spots or people who inadvertently basically just don't have the female perspective, or there's research that shows that we tend to hire people that remind us of ourselves. So if the majority of people are men, they just, without even trying to, they may be gravitating more towards the shared experience hiring other men. So I feel like to some degree, it's people might behave in ways or have behaviors where they're not really trying to exclude women. It just kind of naturally happens, and there's just lack of awareness. So I would say maybe that's one of the things that I'm hoping that I could contribute to addressing in the future by providing that female perspective and maybe helping change.
I think that.
Oh,
sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. And I also wanted to say, in terms of like where we come from, you know, like I come from Bulgaria. I also wanted to say that I have one anecdote that happened in one of my first jobs, which was pretty jarring. And of course, I'm dating myself, so I wanted to show that there is some change actually. But so I was the only woman in this company, and at one point the office manager came and he said, "Oh, guess what? We've got excuse me, we've got a coffee maker, and let me show it to you." And I was like, I love coffee as much as the next person. I really do. So I was like, oh, cool, yay, coffee. And he's like, and I really want to show you how to make coffee since you're the only lady in the office. And like the implication was, since you're the only lady, you have the privilege of making coffee for the rest of us. And I was like, wow. So I don't think this kind of thing is likely to happen today. And I'm so thankful for it. I think that's great. So is there progress? I would like to say there is. Maybe overt discrimination is, I think, maybe less. But I think as a society, we still have a lot of work.
Yeah.
Maybe with, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're at least addressing it more and more, and there's different programs, organizations doing it. And I think what's strongest is that both of you also serve as role models. You know, you're doing that. You're in the tech sphere. You're successful. You made it. So I think more such examples are definitely the strongest case. And I would be happy to continue asking questions and having this discussion with you. But I think the most interesting part is actually hearing from the audience and the people that are listening and addressing their questions today. We already have one question, and I advise everyone to either write on the chat area in Facebook, or perhaps you can join afterwards in the using your microphone and camera. The first question comes from Mahamat Wahban. Apologize if I misspelled your name, and it's related to what we're talking about. It is to Ana. Is there a person you take as a role model?
Hey, sorry, Maria. I think something's cut off on my end, so I couldn't actually hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Sorry.
Okay.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, sure, no worries. So we already opened the Q&A part, and we had the first question coming up towards yourself. It came from Mahamat Wahban, and he's asking you whether there is a person you take as a role model.
Ooh, that's a really good question. And so I draw a lot of inspiration from just the women in my own family, but that's kind of not the right answer, I think, here, because I would like to draw on somebody that we might all know. So actually my professional inspiration is Mark Benioff, the CEO of Salesforce. Who just the way he's grown the company, the way he's created a technology category, and the way he goes about his day-to-day business and philanthropy is hugely inspiring to me. So I think he's my closest proxy in terms of who I would like to emulate as a leader. But that said, I don't really have a role model that I kind of universally look up to. I like to combine what I'm seeing from a lot of different leaders and a lot of different people. So short of Mark and folks in my family, I don't really have a go-to person.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting question indeed. I think it's interesting to also hear from Denitza. What about yourself? Do you have a role model, perhaps in the tech sphere, or else? As we discussed, we have broad interests, so perhaps it's outside of the tech industry.
That's it's a very interesting question as well. I probably should have because I do admire a lot of people, and I kind of like to follow a lot of people. So I have to say I also am a huge fan of Mark Benioff and Salesforce as well. Just because of I love also some of progressive the progressive ideals that he espouses. And I'm thinking of, sorry, I'm not coming up with great answers on the spot.
It's a really
No
tricky
worries.
question, and thank you for because the answer is either like this one person or like 100 different people. So it's really hard.
Yeah, perhaps it's a mix indeed. From you take this thing from one person, then another from another person.
Yeah.
So a lot of inspiration.
But I do want to. Something's kind of got up, hit a light bulb in my head. One of the things that we talked about in the context of liberal arts is this melange of different disciplines, and so it's interesting that I'm finding that I'm mostly looking towards inspiration across other disciplines. So whether that's in the world of art or film or other adjacent fields than like tech and CS. And I think that's an interesting twist on how to think about our role model in general.
Yeah, I agree with that.
We continue to have more questions. I'm looking at the chat right now. We have a hello from Nadia Zlatova, who says hi to Ana after perhaps not seeing her after 20 years. She congratulates you on your success and progress, both of you actually, both Denitza and Ana. And the question is towards both of you. Based on your experience, what have you learned to be the most critical aspect in motivating your teams so that your project timelines can be met?
So I think Denitza said this best. It's about ownership, and I'm a firm believer of not being that top-down boss. I like to challenge my teams by giving them clear direction on what I'd like to accomplish, and then getting out of their way, so that they can, bring their own approaches, their own perspectives, and that requires operating in a team with a lot of trust. And just having a lot of leeway to, sometimes mess up. And I think, Denitza, this is probably a much more interesting topic for you, especially given the book mix that you were mentioning earlier. So I'll turn the floor over.
Well, along the same lines, basically, I like I like all of my team members at every level to feel like they have skin in the game, and when they're given an assignment, or I want them to understand exactly what is the end goal here. So in general, sometimes what's been challenging is some developers may expect, or that's what they have been used to, they expect to kind of give me the spec and I'll just like code to the spec. And sometimes and what we're asking them to do is, okay, here is the spec, but here is actually the customer problem. And we encourage a lot of customer empathy. In some cases, we might have recordings of what customers have asked for, and we ask them to picture themselves. Imagine you're like in, I don't know, like this tax accountant, and you have to log in every day, and you have 3 hours to do this, this, and that. And you're the person who has to help them accomplish this task. And basically, I want them to ask a lot of questions, to come up with a lot of suggestions. And we kind of try to do that by demonstrating, more senior people or more experienced people demonstrating how it's done, and then expecting everyone to eventually modeling that behavior, and then providing guidance along the way, including sometimes criticism. And sometimes, and we also encourage when they do the right thing, we celebrate that, and we encourage people to hold each other, peers to hold each other accountable, not just managers, but everybody should feel accountable for the end result. So it's not easy. I'm not saying that it's easy, but those are the ideals that we kind of try to build.
Yeah, great. We have some great takeaways here. Good examples, responsibility, skin in the game, and no micromanaging. We continue to have questions both in the chat and on Facebook. The next one is the following. During your career, what was the biggest challenge or failure you faced? How did you overcome it? And in a moment of hard times, how do you deal with those challenges?
Oh, what a great question.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, if you think about your career in different time horizons, something that feels like a failure right now might not necessarily look like that 5 years later or 10 years later. And taking yourself out of that moment of, oh my God, everything is failing, this is horrible, and thinking long term is really a superpower. And that's very, very hard to do. You know, early on in my career, I had a startup fail. And so we had to shut it down and basically kind of, you know, take the company through the cycle of going out of business. And I took that really, really, really hard because I'd tied a lot of my own identity to this company. Don't ever do that. That's no, just and so, you know, it made things that are, you know, they suck, but ultimately they're easy to overcome. It made them much more seem much more dire. So it took me a long time to dig out from that. It led to like a lot of burnout and just struggling with like getting back to a creative and energetic flow. And now I would say that, especially after this past year of you know, mostly working from home, I'm definitely much more cognizant of burnout, spotting it on amongst my team, and kind of, you know, it's not an easy conversation to have when you see that somebody is getting increasingly frustrated and kind of needs to take a break. It's not an easy conversation to have as a manager, to kind of go and say, hey, you know, you should really take a few days off. So I think that's the thing that I'm most on the lookout for now, and trying to be proactive and spot when somebody might be experiencing a bit of a rough time, and kind of try to skate in front of that.
And at the same time, you perhaps have to do it for yourself, right? Like to also be able to, okay, manage the people, but also manage your own time and your personal well-being.
I'm terrible at that. This is everybody in the company knows about this, so they, you know, I can kind of start seeing them sending me messages like, you know, are you sleeping? Like, should you like stop doing this now, and stuff like that. So yeah, but that's a very, very good point, because it's easy to kind of spot this in somebody else, but it's really, you kind of, you know, have to work twice as hard to spot it in yourself too, and make sure you're not, you know, you're listening to your own advice basically.
Yeah. Denitza, what are your thoughts about this? How do you deal with your challenges, your daily challenges?
Yeah, so basically I think I just have to remind myself that the road to success is paved with multiple failures along the way. And, you know, like when we hear about like famous people accomplishing great things, we hear like about the end result, and maybe in our heads, at least in my head, I tend to imagine, oh man, they just like got there in like one straight shot. And like, so I've had projects that basically failed, and I took it similarly. It was really, really hard, and I kind of felt like, okay, this is it. I'm a complete failure entirely because of this one thing. And I just subsequently, what I've had to remind myself again is yeah, this is not your only shot. I'll make mistakes. We all make mistakes, and you just kind of have to like keep going, and you know, the next time will be better.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something that we definitely need to remind ourselves quite often sometimes. I'm a bit mindful on the time, so perhaps there's time for one more question, and then a final one from my part, and then we finalized today's wonderful discussion. I would like to encourage everyone who is here to add us on LinkedIn or other ways of communication so we can continue being in touch and continue this wonderful discussion. The next question is from Mimi Marinova, someone who almost mirrors my name. What do you think is needed to have more women in the tech industry? Great question.
Do you want to go?
Go first? Okay, I can just quickly say, I think awareness that sometimes even if we, and this is true not just for more women, but more maybe underrepresented groups in any industry. One big part is like, which is what we can do as individuals, and this is like more awareness of our blind spots, and that diversity and is actually, there's a lot of untapped potential, and so much women can offer to the tech industry. We have so much to offer, and currently it's like untapped. So having that awareness in your individual actions, and like to what Ana said, maybe when you're hiring, if you're in a position to hire, consider that, hire from that perspective. And then I also feel like, in addition to each one of us trying to solve it in our own little sphere, there's probably, we should all probably advocate where we can for some sort of, because there are like some societal and systemic changes, and we should also try to solve it as a society. And I'm sorry, I don't have specific recipes there, but I feel individually and societally, we should work on both of these fronts. And Ana, sorry, I didn't want to.
No, that's perfect. I think my answer is very similar, and I'll just add that, you know, we need to take this seriously, and we really need men to lead here. And the problem is that the tech industry in particular has been so favoring men that a lot of them are threatened by the mere thought of having other perspectives present in the workplace, and they're feeling very protective, and they're doing that at every level of tech and computer science, in particular education. So this is why for years we've heard about the pipeline problem. And in the meantime, it's, you know, you're kind of moving women from one hostile environment into another. And I had this conversation about 5 years ago with a friend who's a, you know, senior leader and was trying to hire for a team, and he was, you know, flabbergasted that no women are applying to his team. And I told him, well, let me look at the way you've written your job description. And the metaphor that I gave him was, you've written this in such a way that, you know, how do you think you would score if I was ranking you on your ability to give birth to a child? And he said, well, that's nuts. I can't, you know, I can't give birth to a child. And I said, yes, exactly. And you've worded your job description in such a way that it highlights, you know, even mediocre men in a very advantageous light, and you're not surfacing any of the parts of the role that would be attractive to anybody that's not identifying as a, you know, standard like CS, you know, coder, white male personality. And so everybody in leadership needs to take this seriously and needs to understand that we're just going to get better if we are more welcoming, and if we are looking at individual contributions through different lenses, and not just that one lens of like a hyper competitive, very, you know, factory, industrial age driven approach to work that we still largely subscribe to today.
Yeah, absolutely. We also see it in our field of work. And private equity and venture capital is as you know, like the one
Yeah.
of the least represented by women industries worldwide. And we were participating in this panel some days ago, where a female partner of a Bulgaria-based VC fund was giving some really interesting ideas about, you know, how important it is to have like female investors, because that's how you know, the female founders also mirror themselves, and there are ways and there are products that are only picked up by women. For example, a recent fertility app that was you know, invested by the fund. And this is some things are very specific and could be picked up only or mainly by women for obvious reasons. So that was a really good thought, you know, to include more female investors so you can have more female founders. Really good way to go. Well, thanks a lot. I'd like to ask you a final question before we finish our great discussion. As you know, there's a lot of current or perhaps prospective students listening to us at AUBG, as well as alums at AUBG. So the topic of the alums of the university is quite an important one. As you know, we a lot of us stay in touch after university, and sometimes even create projects, businesses, or even funds together. Do you stay in touch with some of the alumni of the universities of AUBG? Do you have mutual projects or talked about it, or do you plan to have these?
So oh gosh, almost 10 years ago now, I want to say, we started getting together in New York, and we formed an AUBG alumni club, and started fundraising for scholarships going back to AUBG. So some of you on this call might actually be applying for or potentially a recipient of the New York area alumni scholarship, and that's lovely. So yeah, I think for me, it's mostly been social rather than from a business perspective, but it's mostly because the bulk of my business has really been not so much focused on Eastern Europe or Bulgaria to date, where I think contacts from my generation at AUBG would probably be the strongest. But you know, I run into AUBG grads everywhere. So 2 years ago, I was speaking at a conference in Melbourne, and somebody from the audience approached me and said, "Hey, you know, I'm an AUBG grad too." So like we are everywhere, and we're a very, very powerful community that I think can create really wonderful, you know, personal and professional opportunities for each other. So I'm looking forward to doing more of that in the coming years.
Absolutely. Denitza, do you feel the same way? What do you stay in touch with AUBG alumni?
Yeah, absolutely. Some of my closest friends are friends that I made while I was at AUBG, and you know, like it's been amazing. We've gone to each other's weddings, we've seen each other's children grow, and yes, I agree with Anna. AUBG graduates tend to be highly accomplished, and they're everywhere. So I would say to any potential students or recent or people who are graduating soon that you should be confident that you have a rigorous education and you're part of a very highly accomplished community.
Absolutely, and it's true. We're everywhere. Wherever you go, there is an AUBGer there that have this sense of connection. It's really great.
And that's the one thing that I find really special. It's that as soon as you know somebody is an AUBG alum or current student, the connection is so strong. Like, you know, the campus looks very different now than it did when I was at school, than when Denitza was at school. Like, I don't know if I'd find my way around Blagoevgrad today. I kind of hope I would, but who knows? But I think we all share that very unique bond that AUBG creates, and the exposure to students from different backgrounds and the environment that it creates is really, really unique and hard to replicate in any other campus.
Absolutely. What a fabulous way to end this wonderful discussion. Thanks again to both Ana and Denitza, and of course to AUBG for inviting us and for organizing this great discussion. I really hope we all stay in touch via the different digital tools that are present. And looking forward to the next meeting, online or offline.